horror, 16 dead bodies in a pig farm, and the chilling truth. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The wind that swept through Duplin County on the evening of the 12th of October, 2019, was unlike any the folks in Kenansville had felt in years. The storm had rolled in heavy from the coast, carrying with it sheets of rain that rattled rooftops and turned dirt roads into rivers of mud. Most people had long since shut their doors, drawn their curtains, and settled in for a night of uneasy rest, praying the storm would pass without flooding their homes or barns. But not everyone slept that night. Out near the edge of town, past the tobacco fields and the long stretch of highway, stood Benton Hog Operations, one of the largest pig farms in the county. The place had a reputation depending on who you asked. Some said Hal Benton, the owner, was a generous man, giving donations to the local Baptist church and handing out extra feed to struggling farmers. Others whispered different things that made folks lower their voices and glance over their shoulders when his name came up. Strange lights at odd hours, the hum of machinery in the dead of night. And then there was the smell, a stench that seemed to cling heavier around Benton's farm than any other. That night, as the storm roared, neighbors living within earshot swore they heard something far more chilling than the wind. Just past midnight, above the rattling tin roofs and the squeals of hogs unsettled by the weather, came the unmistakable sound of a human scream. It was sharp, desperate, and it cut through the rain like a blade. Some thought it was just the storm playing tricks, or maybe a hog squealing louder than usual. But those who knew better swore it was no animal. It was the sound of a soul in mortal fear. By morning, when the storm clouds broke and the fields lay heavy with puddles, a farmer driving past Benton's property noticed something unusual. Near the rusted barbed wire fence that lined the hog barns, a dark stain stretched along the red clay road. At first glance, it looked like rainwater mixed with mud. But as the man slowed his truck and leaned closer, the truth settled into his gut like a stone. It was blood, a long smear of it, dragged across the earth, half washed away by the night's downpour. Word travels fast in small towns, faster than the wind. By noon, whispers were swirling through Kenansville. Something terrible had happened out at Hal Benton's farm. Folks remembered the scream, the blood, and the strange man who lived alone with hundreds of hogs, yet never touched a bite of meat. They remembered the stories about the workers he hired. Never locals, always outsiders. Women mostly, who came looking for a chance, and sometimes never came back. That October morning, the Benton farm seemed to hold its breath, shrouded in silence save for the restless grunts of the hogs. No answers came, only questions. And behind every question, a cold sense of dread. Hal Benton was the kind of man who kept people guessing. At 52, he had the weathered face of someone who'd spent most of his life under the Carolina sun, yet he carried himself with a stiffness, a calculated calm that made folks uneasy. He rarely joined in at the diner, never lingered in town, and when he did show up at the Sunday service, he slipped in late and left early, always avoiding small talk. Still, people knew a few things about him. Quirks, they called them, though some whispered red flags. For one, Hal Benton hadn't eaten meat in decades. In Duplin County, where hogs outnumbered people nearly 30-1, a man running one of the largest pig farms who claimed to live on nothing but vegetables seemed odd. He said it was for health, some kind of personal conviction, but in the back rooms of diners and at feed stores, the rumor was always the same. He didn't eat pork because he knew what went into it. Another peculiarity was the way he hired. Hal never took on local boys, never gave jobs to neighbors' sons or cousins. He brought in drifters, women mostly, from other states, people nobody around town recognized. They'd show up on a Monday, tired and quiet, usually carrying little more than a backpack. Folks would see them walking down the gravel drive into the Benton property, disappearing behind the steel gates. For a while, they'd be spotted in town on errands, buying groceries, sending money orders, calling home from the gas station payphone. But eventually, for many, the sightings would stop. Some chalked it up to the nature of farm work. hard, low pay, high turnover. But others wondered, why did so many come in and never leave? And then there was the silence of the farm itself. Most hog operations were noisy, filthy places you could hear squeals for miles, smell the manure lagoon long before you reached the fence line. Benton hog operations was different. The odor was there, strong enough to curl your stomach, but the sounds seemed strangely muted, as if the animals had been swallowed by the stillness. Visitors often said the quiet pressed down on them, heavy and unnatural, leaving them with a sense of being watched. Those who'd been inside described something even stranger. The barns were spotless, the feed rooms arranged like a military drill. Hal's office was as sterile as a hospital ward, no family photos, no clutter, no signs of ordinary life. "It's cleaner than my doctor's office," one repairman once said, shaking his head. "But it don't feel right. It feels like walking into a tomb." Hal himself, with his soft voice and polite smile, only deepened the unease. He never raised his tone, never argued, but there was something in his eyes, something cold, like pond water in winter, that made folks look away. Pastor Hill, the Baptist minister who often received donations from Hal, once told his wife he couldn't quite pin it down. "It's like he's wearing a mask," the pastor said. "Looks polite, sounds gentle, but I swear when he looks at you, he's not really looking at you. He's looking through you." Rumors, of course, grew thick in a place like Duplin County. Some laughed them off small-town gossip, nothing more. But others remembered the strange things. The trucks that arrived in the dead of night and left before dawn. The odd glow from the feed barn at hours when the rest of the county slept. And most of all, the women strangers who appeared at the farm one day and then vanished, their names never spoken again. Yet no one dared confront him. Hal Benton had money, power, and a reputation for handling his own problems. In a county where jobs were scarce and folks relied on one another to keep the peace, many chose silence over suspicion. "Ain't my business," they'd mutter. "Best to let that man be." But silence has a way of curdling into fear. After that October night, when the scream echoed through the storm and the blood was found at the fence, the whispers grew louder. Some said Benton's hogs weren't the only things being fed. Others claimed his barns held secrets darker than the manure pits. Whether out of fear or denial, no one went looking for answers. Not yet. The farm remained locked behind its gates, Hal Benton's calm smile unchanged, the hogs restless in their pens. And in that uneasy quiet, the shadow over Benton hog operations deepened, waiting for the next soul brave enough or desperate enough to step inside. In the hills of West Virginia, where the mountains fold over one another like old blankets and the mornings carry a mist that lingers until noon, lived a woman named Martha Green. At 65, Martha had known a life of quiet endurance. Her husband had passed years before, leaving her with a modest home, a patch of garden, and the steady companionship of her youngest daughter, Lily. Lily was the kind of girl whose gentleness could soften even the hardest day. She had lost her husband young, left to raise a child on her own. It wasn't easy, every dollar stretched thin, every choice weighed with worry, but she bore it with quiet strength. She cleaned houses, waited tables, and even did shifts at a poultry plant when the work came her way. Through it all, she spoke often of her son, promising herself that no matter the sacrifice, he would have shoes that fit, books for school, and a chance at more than she'd ever had. By the spring of 2019, though, the strain had grown heavy. The bills piled higher, the house roof sagged lower, and Martha's body, bent from years of labor, could do little more than tend the garden and mind her grandson. Lily, restless and determined, began to look further afield. Word had spread that down in North Carolina, farms were hiring. The pay wasn't much, but it was steady, and to Lily, steady sounded like salvation. Martha remembered the night Lily told her she was leaving. They sat at the old oak table, the hum of summer crickets outside, and Lily's hands trembled as she unfolded a bus schedule she had picked up. "Mom," she said softly, "I'll only be gone a couple of years. Just long enough to save up, fix the roof, and get little James into a good school. Then I'll come back." Martha wanted to beg her not to go, but looking into her daughter's eyes, she saw a fire she couldn't quench. So instead, she pressed Lily's hands between her own and whispered, "Promise me you'll call every week." And for a while, Lily kept that promise. From the payphone near the gas station in Kenansville, she'd call home every Sunday evening. Her voice was tired but cheerful. She told her mother about the long days feeding hogs, about the other workers she hardly knew, about how the barns seemed too quiet and the nights too long. But always she reassured her. "I'm fine, Mom. Don't you worry." She even sent a little money, enough to patch the roof, enough to keep the lights on. But as summer turned to fall, the calls began to falter. First it was excuses. The payphone was broken. I had to work late. Then the money orders grew smaller. And finally, one Sunday evening in late September, the line went dead halfway through her call. After that, there was only silence. At first, Martha tried to convince herself it was nothing. Maybe Lily had changed phones, maybe she was busy, maybe she'd write. But as weeks passed, the silence grew unbearable. At night, she dreamed of Lily calling out, her voice choked with fear, swallowed by the squeals of hogs. Martha would wake in a sweat, whispering her daughter's name into the dark. Neighbors told her not to worry. She probably found someone new, they said. Young women move on, happens all the time. But Martha knew her child. Lily wasn't the kind to run off without a word, not with a son waiting for her and a mother counting the days between phone calls. Something was wrong. So one crisp October morning, Martha packed a small suitcase, tucked the worn photograph of Lily into her pocket, and boarded a bus bound for North Carolina. She was nervous, her legs ached, her savings were thin, but her heart allowed no other choice. A mother doesn't stop searching, not while she still breathes. The journey was long, winding through the Appalachian Mountains and down into the flat farmland of Duplin County. Martha pressed her forehead to the bus window, watching the landscape change. Each mile carried her further from home, further into uncertainty. But she held fast to a single thought: I will find my daughter. When she stepped off the bus in Kenansville, the air was thick with the smell of hog farms. Trucks rumbled down the roads, hauling feed and livestock. The town itself was small, its streets quiet, its people polite but guarded. Martha asked for directions, clutching the photo of Lily in her hand, until finally someone pointed her toward the Benton farm. From a distance, she saw it, the gray tin roofs, the long barns, the barbed wire fence stretching wide. Even before she reached the gate, her heart quickened. The smell hit her first, acrid and suffocating, but beneath it was something worse, something she couldn't name. A silence, heavy and watchful, as if the place itself were hiding a secret. She stood there, trembling, calling out her daughter's name. Moments later, the gate creaked open, and Hal Benton appeared, his face calm, his eyes unreadable. He offered her a smile that never reached his eyes, and invited her in for tea. And though Martha accepted because what else could she do, her soul whispered the truth she already feared. Whatever had become of Lily, the answers lay beyond that gate, and Hal Benton was not about to give them freely. Martha followed Hal Benton through the gate, her steps unsteady on the gravel path. The farm stretched before her, long barns standing silent, their tin roofs dripping from the storm the night before. The smell was strong, sharper now, almost chemical beneath the natural stench of hogs. She clutched the photograph of Lily in her hand like a talisman, praying that at any moment her daughter might step out from behind one of those doors. Inside the farmhouse, Hal moved with a composure that unsettled her. He poured tea into a porcelain cup, his gestures precise, his expression calm. He asked about her long trip from West Virginia, nodded politely, and smiled in that practiced way of his. Then, as if delivering a simple fact, he told her Lily was gone. According to him, she had left with a truck driver bound for Texas, chasing steady work and a new beginning. She was excited, he said, leaning back in his chair. Told me to let you know she was doing fine. The words were too neat, too polished, as if he had prepared them in advance. Martha's heart sank. Lily was shy, cautious, the kind of woman who had trouble asking a cashier for change. The idea that she would abandon her son and run off across the country with a stranger was impossible. A mother knows her child, and Martha knew she was being lied to. She left the farmhouse shaken, her shoes crunching on the gravel as she stepped back into the October air. She lingered outside the gates, staring at the barns, at the strange stillness that seemed to wrap around the place. A part of her wanted to cry out Lily's name, but fear tightened her throat. Something in Hal Benton's steady gaze made her feel small, as if she had stepped into a game where the rules belonged to him alone. She turned away and made her way back to town. The next morning, Martha went to the sheriff's office in Kenansville. She sat across from a deputy at a worn desk, sliding the photograph of Lily across the surface. She told him everything. The phone calls that had stopped, the money orders that had dwindled, the too-perfect explanation from Hal Benton. She even confessed the way she woke in the night, with Lily's voice echoing in her ears. The deputy listened, tapping his pencil, and when she was finished, he sighed. "Ma'am," he said, "we see this a lot. Young women meet someone, start fresh, don't always tell their families. I'm sure your daughter's fine. If she reaches out, we'll let you know." His tone was kind but distant, as if the matter were already closed. Martha tried again, this time with the sheriff himself, a man with a heavy mustache and weary eyes. She begged him to look into Benton's farm, to talk to the workers, to check the payroll, anything at all. But he only shook his head. "Without evidence of a crime, we can't just go barging in. Mr. Benton is a respected member of this community. He donates to the church, he pays his taxes. I understand your worry, but you'll have to be patient." The words felt like stone walls closing around her. To them, Lily was just another name on a long list of missing girls, a story too familiar to stir action. Back at her rented room above the diner, Martha wept quietly into her hands. The indifference cut deeper than Hal's lie. His tale was flimsy, yet it was accepted without question. Her instincts, her grief, the ache in her bones that told her something was terribly wrong, all dismissed as the worry of an old woman. But Martha was not ready to surrender. Each night, she sat at the diner's counter with a cup of weak coffee, showing Lily's photograph to anyone who would look. She wandered the market square, the gas stations, the laundromats, asking the same question over and over, "Have you seen my daughter?" Some shook their heads and walked away. Others offered polite condolences, urging her to go home. But now and then, someone leaned in, lowered their voice, and shared a whisper. Other women had gone missing after working at Benton's farm. Screams had been heard on stormy nights. Trucks had rolled out under cover of darkness. Each fragment was small, a splinter of truth buried beneath fear. But Martha gathered them like pieces of a puzzle she refused to abandon. She knew the sheriff's office would not help her. She knew Hal Benton would never speak the truth. But she also knew one thing with unshakable certainty. A mother's heart is rarely wrong. Lily had not run off to Texas. Something had happened on that farm, and Martha Green was determined to uncover it, even if she had to stand alone against a man who smiled too easily and a town that looked the other way. Martha's days in Kenansville settled into a rhythm that was both exhausting and relentless. Each morning, she left her small rented room above the diner, the photograph of Lily tucked safely into her coat pocket, and walked the streets of the little town. She stopped at the gas station, the grocery store, the laundromat where women gathered with baskets full of clothes, and she asked the same question again and again. "Have you seen my daughter?" Some shook their heads without looking up. Some muttered polite condolences. But now and then, someone paused, studied the photograph, and sighed as though the picture stirred something unspoken. One woman at the laundromat whispered, "She looks like one of the girls I saw at Benton's farm last summer. I think I saw her buying bread at the Dollar General." And then she was gone. No one's seen her since. A mechanic told Martha that on stormy nights he sometimes heard a cry carried over the wind, sharp and fleeting, swallowed up by the squeals of hogs. "It's probably nothing," he said quickly, glancing over his shoulder, "but it sure didn't sound like nothing to me." At first, these bits of talk only deepened Martha's grief. The sheriff had dismissed her, the deputies had waved her away, and yet ordinary people were admitting things that matched her fear. Something was wrong out there. The voices were quiet, but they formed an undercurrent that could not be ignored. Martha kept listening. She sat on benches outside the courthouse, lingered in the pews of the Baptist church, stayed late at the diner counter, and slowly she gathered a clearer picture. She heard about other women, not just Lily, who had come to work at Benton's farm and never returned. A waitress spoke of a cousin who vanished after 3 months there. A farmhand recalled seeing strange trucks pulling up to the barns after midnight. Each story was fragmentary, but together they formed a pattern that haunted her. It was during one of these evenings at the diner that her persistence caught the attention of someone who mattered. Lieutenant Mark Lawson had been sitting in a corner booth, sipping coffee after a long shift. He had worked with the Duplin County Sheriff's Office for nearly 2 decades, and though he had learned to let most gossip slide past him, something about the old woman's steady determination struck him. He watched her pull Lily's photograph from her coat pocket and show it to the waitress, to the man paying his bill, to anyone who would pause long enough to look. Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. When the diner had thinned out, Lawson rose from his booth and walked over. "Ma'am," he said gently, "may I sit down?" Martha looked up, surprised by the kindness in his tone, and nodded. He slid into the booth across from her, folding his large hands on the table. "I've heard you've been asking about your daughter." Martha's eyes filled, but her voice stayed steady. She told him everything: the phone calls that had stopped, the money orders that had dwindled, Hal Benton's too perfect explanation, the rumors she had collected around town. Lawson listened without interrupting, his brow furrowed as the pieces began to fit together. He had heard stories before, families saying their daughters never came home, workers drifting in and out, lives swallowed by the grind of poverty. Until now, he had filed them away as coincidence, but through Martha's voice, it no longer sounded like chance. When she finished, Lawson leaned back in his seat. "You've done more legwork than some of my deputies," he said quietly. "I can't promise you anything yet, but I think you're right. Something isn't adding up." He asked to borrow the photograph, and when Martha hesitated, he assured her he would guard it carefully. Then he stood, placed a few dollars on the counter for both their coffees, and told her he would be in touch. As he stepped into the cool night air, Lawson's thoughts turned heavy. Years of service had left him wary of chasing shadows, yet something in this case stirred him differently. Perhaps it was the look in Martha's eyes, or the uneasy memories of other women who had gone missing, their names left to gather dust in old files. Whatever it was, he knew he couldn't let this one slip by. Back in her room that night, Martha lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling. For the first time since arriving in Kenansville, she felt a small measure of hope. Someone had finally listened. Someone with the authority to do more than shrug. She clung to that hope as the hours passed, her body weary but her spirit unwilling to rest. Somewhere beyond the fields, her daughter's trail had gone cold, but now a spark had been lit. And though Martha did not know it yet, that spark was enough to set in motion a chain of events that would shake Duplin County to its core. For the next week, Lieutenant Mark Lawson moved with care, as though the very walls of the sheriff's office might be listening. He knew better than to announce what he had found. Benton had friends in town, people who owed him favors, people who preferred silence, and if he spoke too soon, word would surely reach the farm. He needed more than rumors, more than grainy footage. He needed to see inside. The problem was simple. Benton trusted no one. He never hired locals, never allowed visitors, never left anything in plain sight. Surveillance would be useless. The barns were shielded by high fences and Benton's own cameras. A warrant was impossible without stronger evidence. What Lawson needed was a pair of eyes inside the farm, someone who could blend in, work quietly, and return with the truth. Julia Price came to mind. At 28, she was young but sharp, with a stubborn streak Lawson respected. She had gone undercover before in trafficking cases along the interstate, knew how to play a role, how to listen more than speak, how to survive in hostile ground. If anyone could step through Benton's gate and walk out alive with answers, it was her. He called her into his office late one evening, long after most deputies had gone home. With the blinds drawn, he laid out everything: the missing women, the bank withdrawals, the ATM footage. Julia listened, her expression tightening as the story unfolded. When he finished, she leaned back and asked, "So you think he's taking them?" "I don't think," Lawson said. "I know. I just can't prove it yet." Julia was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "And you want me inside?" Lawson hesitated. He hated the idea. "If we do this, it'll be dangerous. Benton is careful. He'll be watching." Her voice was steady. "If those women are gone, someone has to speak for them. I'll do it." Within days, the plan was in motion. Julia shed her uniform and became someone else. A recently divorced woman, desperate for work, drifting from job to job. They built a history for her seasonal labor, odd shifts at diners, a trail of hardship that would seem believable. Her ID was altered, her story rehearsed until it was second nature. The morning she walked up Benton's gravel drive, the sky was gray, the air thick with manure and damp earth. She wore faded jeans, a flannel shirt, and carried a small backpack with nothing traceable inside. At the gate she paused, steadied her breath, and knocked. Hal Benton appeared himself, tall and thin, eyes unreadable beneath the brim of his cap. He studied her for a long moment, weighing her like an animal at market. Finally, he asked, "Looking for work?" Julia lowered her eyes, voice soft. "Yes, sir. I heard you hire women. I just need something steady." After a long pause, Hal opened the gate. "We'll see if you're useful," he said. From the moment she stepped onto the farm, Julia felt danger pressing in. The barns were too quiet, the workers subdued, their eyes hollow. They moved quickly, keeping their heads down, speaking little. At night, when the farm should have slept, she heard the hum of machinery in the feed barn, always in the darkest hours before dawn. Sometimes she saw Hal crossing the yard, pushing a wheelbarrow covered with a tarp toward the sheds. Julia stayed cautious, but every detail she memorized. When alone, she recorded notes into a small device hidden in her backpack. Locked sheds, cameras facing inward, keys clinking at Hal's belt that never left his sight. She even befriended an older worker named Rosa, who whispered one night, "Don't ask questions. People who ask don't last long here." Julia gave no reply, but Rosa's warning only strengthened her resolve. She had been trained for this. Her job was to last long enough to uncover the truth. Meanwhile, Lawson waited anxiously in town, checking his phone for Julia's coded updates. Barns locked at night, workers scared, strange smells by feed shed. Each message painted a darker picture than he had expected. And as Julia moved deeper into Benton's world, the line between safety and discovery thinned with every passing day. Julia had been on the farm for nearly 10 days, and already the weight of the place pressed on her like a burden. The air was heavy, not just with the stench of hogs, but with a silence that felt unnatural. By day, she worked as the others did, feeding hogs, scrubbing floors, repairing pens. The labor was ordinary. It was the nights that gnawed at her. The first time she heard the grinding noise, it was past 2 in the morning. At first she thought it was the feed machines, but this sound was deeper, harsher, like metal biting through something it shouldn't. Peering through her window, she saw Hal Benton in the yard, pushing a wheelbarrow draped with a tarp. The wheels cut into the mud, glistening in the moonlight, as he guided it into the feed barn where the noise grew louder, then vanished. Her training told her to wait. When the farm finally quieted, she crept toward the barn. The door was locked, but on the concrete near the corner, she noticed a patch scrubbed too clean. Under her pocket, UV light faint streaks glowed purple, blood. She snapped a photo with her hidden watch camera and slipped back. At dawn, she sent a coded message to Lawson. "Stains near feed barn, not animal." As the days passed, Julia befriended Rosa, an older worker worn down by fear. One evening, while sweeping near the pens, Rosa whispered, "There was a girl once young, always crying." One morning she was gone. Hal said she left, but her shoes were still under the bed. Rosa's eyes flicked nervously toward the farmhouse. "Don't ask questions," she muttered before walking away. That night, Julia approached a storage shed she had seen Hal frequent. The padlock held, but through a crack she glimpsed a pile of clothing, fabric too delicate for farm work. A scarf, a faded dress, even a child's photograph taped inside a wallet. Her stomach turned. She pressed her phone against the gap, snapping what images she could before retreating. The photos reached Lawson the next morning. He spread them across his desk, a scrubbed patch glowing with blood, women's clothes, a wallet with a child's face. Not enough for an arrest, but far too much to ignore. These weren't belongings left behind by workers moving on. They were remnants of lives cut short. Julia knew the risk was rising. Hal lingered near her more often now, his pale eyes following her movements. Once, as she scrubbed a trough, he leaned close and said in his calm, deliberate tone, "Some people come here thinking they can change things. They don't last." Then he walked away, leaving her throat tight with dread. Still, she pressed forward. One afternoon, while Hal was gone, she slipped into the feed barn. The smell hit her first metallic, cloying. Machines lined the walls, but in one corner stood an old wooden chest. With trembling hands, she pried it open. Inside were small things that froze her blood. A necklace, a cracked phone. A Bible with a woman's name scrawled inside the cover, one Lawson had shown her before she left, belonging to a worker who vanished 2 years earlier. Julia snapped quick photographs, closed the chest, and slipped out before anyone saw. That night, she sent the images. Lawson stared at them, his hands tight on the desk. The Bible, the blood, the clothing, it was still circumstantial, but it tore apart any notion that these women had left by choice. For the first time since he started, Lawson felt certainty pressing hard in his chest. Benton's careful mask was cracking, and with Julia still inside, risking her life each day, the truth was drawing closer, step by step. Julia had begun to sense the change in Hal Benton's gaze. At first, he had seemed distant, treating her like any other worker, but now his eyes lingered too long, sharp and suspicious, as if he had started to see past the mask she wore. That shift revealed itself one Wednesday night when clouds hung low and the air was heavy with rain. Julia slipped quietly from the bunkhouse, intending only to circle the barns and mark down the lights and patrols, but she had barely reached the feed shed when footsteps crunched on the gravel behind her. "Out late, aren't you?" Hal's voice cut through the darkness, steady and unhurried. Julia forced herself into the role she had practiced, lowering her gaze, softening her voice. "I couldn't sleep," she said. "Thought I'd get some air." Hal studied her in silence, the brim of his cap shadowing his eyes, then stepped closer, his boots sinking into the mud. "Funny thing," he said, his tone calm but heavy with warning. "People wander at night here. They don't last." Julia swallowed her fear, kept her head low, and murmured that she would return inside. For a moment he simply stood there, still as a statue, then finally motioned her back to the bunkhouse. "Do that," he said, his voice quiet. "Tomorrow's a long day." She walked with steady steps, though every instinct screamed at her to run. Once inside, in the dark of her bunk, her hands shook as she realized her time was running out. The following morning, Lawson received her coded message. "Too close. Watched. May not last." He read it twice, jaw tightening as the weight of it sank in. Julia had already given more than anyone could have asked, but now she was in Hal Benton's sights, and if she vanished like the others, the case would collapse with her. That evening, Lawson gathered 2 trusted deputies into his office. He spread Julia's photographs across the desk, the bloodstains, the clothing, the Bible, and said, "This is what we have. Not enough for a clean warrant, but enough to act if we're careful." Deputy Harris leaned forward, impatience in his voice. "So we raid him now?" Lawson shook his head. "Too soon and he walks. Too late and she's gone. We prepare quietly and wait for her signal." They spoke in hushed tones, weighing every risk until Lawson outlined his plan. Build a task force of officers he could trust, men and women who would not leak a word. They would watch the farm day and night, ready to strike when Julia gave the call. In the days that followed, Lawson drove the back roads near Benton's property, parking where the trees hid his car and watching the farm from a distance. At night, he saw the same patterns Julia had described, the feed barn lit long past midnight, the low hum of machinery, Hal's thin frame moving across the yard with a wheelbarrow under the cover of darkness. Each sight tightened the knot in his gut. Inside the farm, Julia moved with growing caution. She kept her head down, stayed close to Rosa when she could, but Hal seemed to be everywhere, appearing suddenly, questioning her work, studying her with a patience that felt like the stillness before a storm. One night, as rain battered the roofs, Julia overheard him speaking on the phone in his office. She could not catch everything, but one phrase pierced through: "She won't last much longer." That night she sent Lawson another message: "He suspects. Moving soon." The words left Lawson no choice. He called his team together in a dim garage at the edge of town. Plainclothes officers, each chosen for their loyalty and silence, stood around the hood of his car as Lawson laid Julia's photographs out before them. His voice was low but firm. "This man has taken women for years, 16 that we know of. He hides behind his farm and thinks he's untouchable. We don't have enough for a courtroom yet, but we can't wait. One of ours is inside, and if we delay, she'll disappear like the rest. We move when she gives the word." The silence that followed was heavy, but one by one, every head nodded. That night, Julia lay awake on her narrow bunk, listening to the rain hammer the tin roof while Hal's words echoed in her mind. And miles away, Lawson stood under the cold sky, staring toward the farm. He knew the storm was coming. The only question was whether they would reach Julia and the truth before Hal Benton buried it forever. The storm clouds had lingered for days, leaving the farm drenched in mud. Julia felt it in her bones that time was running out. Hal Benton's eyes followed her with growing suspicion, as though he was deciding whether to keep her or cast her aside. Every instinct warned her she was standing on the edge, yet she knew she couldn't leave without one final piece of proof, something Lawson could carry into court that no one could deny. That night, long after the others had gone to their bunks, Julia lay awake listening to the rain on the tin roof. The low hum of machinery started again from the feed barn, the same rhythm she had heard so many nights. This time she moved. Crossing the yard, boots sinking into the mud, she reached the barn door. Locked as always, she pulled the bent nail from her boot and worked it carefully until the latch gave. The smell inside hit her immediately metallic, cloying, faintly rancid. She swept her pocket light across the floor. Stains, dark and uneven, poorly washed but still there. She moved deeper past the grinding machines to the far corner where she had once seen the wooden chest. This time she lifted the lid fully. Her breath caught. Dozens of items lay piled together, rings, wallets, scraps of clothing, each a trace of a woman who had never gone home. One piece stopped her cold. A silver locket etched with initials, exactly as described in a missing persons report Lawson had shown her from Georgia. Hands shaking, she photographed everything: the chest, the contents, the stains on the floor. She whispered into her recorder, naming each item she recognized. Then came the creak of the barn door. Her light vanished instantly. She pressed herself flat behind the machines as footsteps crossed the concrete. Hal's voice slid through the dark. "You think I don't notice? You think I don't see when someone doesn't belong?" His flashlight beam swept close, hovered near the chest, then shifted away. At last, the door groaned shut again. Julia counted to 100 before daring to move. She slipped from the barn, mud clinging to her boots, and hurried back to her bunk. Her message to Lawson was brief. Chest full. Items from victims. He suspects. Act soon. In town, Lawson read the words under the glow of his lamp. The photographs followed the locket, the wallets, the clothing, the chest itself. It was no longer rumor or suspicion. It was evidence of lives erased. Julia had given him what he needed, but at a cost that chilled him. She was more exposed now than ever before. By morning, Lawson had gathered his team in the garage on the edge of town. Plainclothes officers circled the hood of his car as he spread the photographs out. His voice was firm. "This is it. He's been keeping trophies. We move before nightfall." The men and women around him nodded grimly. None of them doubted anymore. The plan was simple. 2 units would approach from the highway, another from the back road through the woods. At dawn they would strike, catching Benton off guard. All Lawson needed was for Julia to hold on until then. He checked his watch again and again, each tick reminding him she was still inside. That night Julia sat on her narrow bunk, her recorder hidden beneath the mattress, her backpack packed with the few things she could carry. Rosa sat nearby, whispering prayers under her breath. Outside, the hogs stirred restlessly in the mud, their cries rising above the rain. Julia closed her eyes and thought of Lawson's voice, the quiet promise that she would not be forgotten. And in town, Lawson stood with his men, reviewing the plan one final time. The evidence was ready. The team was ready. Julia had done her part. Now it was his turn to finish it. The storm was no longer coming. It was here. Dawn broke gray and heavy over Duplin County, mist clinging low across the fields. Lawson stood at the edge of the woods with his task force, the air damp and cool on his skin. Beyond the barbed wire and sagging tin roofs lay Benton hog operations, quiet and still, but Lawson knew better. Inside those barns were years of secrets, and a woman who had risked everything to bring them out. The officers had moved into position before first light. 2 unmarked vans waited along the highway. Another team crouched in the trees to the west. Radios crackled softly as final checks were made. Lawson crouched low, eyes on the dim outline of the farmhouse, and thought of Martha Green clutching her daughter's photograph. Today, he promised, the silence would break. Inside the bunkhouse, Julia sat fully dressed, her recorder hidden deep in her bag. She had not slept, listening instead to Hal's boots pacing outside. When the first engines roared across the gravel, shouts broke the morning. "Sheriff's office! Search warrant!" Officers stormed through the yard, directing the workers out of the bunkhouses. Julia moved with them, her heart pounding, but when she saw Hal freeze in the yard, she stopped. For a fraction of a second, his face was blank. Then he dropped his bucket of feed and sprinted toward the barn. Lawson shouted, "Go!" and charged after him, his men breaking through the door as Hal slammed it shut. The wood splintered under the steel bar, and they burst inside. The air reeked of oil and something sour. Hal stood at the far end, one hand gripping the wheel of a grinder, the other clutching a crowbar. His eyes were wild now, his calm mask gone. "You think you can walk in here?" he snarled. "You think you can take this from me?" "It's over, Hal," Lawson called back. "Put it down." For a moment, Hal looked ready to swing at them. Then Julia's voice rang out from behind Lawson, steady despite the tremor in her chest. "We have it all, Hal. The chest, the photographs. They'll see everything." Hal's head snapped toward her, and panic flickered across his face. He let out a raw laugh and swung the crowbar into the machine, sparks flying. Officers rushed him, knocking him to the floor. He thrashed, spitting curses, until the cuffs locked around his wrists. Lawson pulled him up, their eyes locking. "It's over," he said quietly. Hal only laughed again, broken and bitter. Julia stepped forward, pale but firm. "He was ready for me," she whispered. Lawson gripped her shoulder. "Not today," he said. Outside, more officers searched the sheds, their calls grim as they pulled out clothing and belongings no farmhand should have left behind. Julia turned away, already carrying more than she could bear. By the time the sun burned through the mist, Benton Hog operations swarmed with deputies. Hal Benton was shoved into the back of a van, still muttering, still smiling faintly, as though some victory was his alone. Lawson watched him go, the weight of years of silence heavy on his chest. But Julia was alive, the evidence was real, and justice at last felt within reach. The sun climbed higher, burning away the mist, but the farm did not grow brighter. Morning light only revealed what had long been hidden, rusted hinges, stained floors, and corners where shadows had lingered for years. Lawson stood in the yard as officers moved steadily through barns and sheds. What began as a raid had become something heavier, a reckoning. Since Hal Benton had been hauled away in cuffs, the air itself seemed to shift. Workers huddled outside the bunkhouses, pale and whispering. Some wept quietly, as if years of fear were finally spilling free. Rosa sat on the steps with her hands folded, murmuring prayers. Julia stayed near her, though the exhaustion in her face told Lawson she carried a weight that would never fully lift. Inside the feed barn, officers cataloged what Julia had already seen. The wooden chest sat open on a tarp, its contents spread across a table rings, wallets, bits of clothing. Lawson walked past slowly, his stomach tight, knowing each piece represented a life. One item caught his eye, a silver locket, initials etched on the back. He remembered it from a missing persons file, a family's last memory of a daughter who never came home. "Sir," a deputy called from the far side of the barn. Lawson crossed the concrete floor and found him crouched beside a rusted drain grate. The stench rising from below was unmistakable. They pried it open, and in the muck beneath lay bone fragments tangled in mud. Lawson turned away, pressing his hand to his mouth. "Seal it off," he ordered hoarsely. "Get the coroner here. Search every inch of this place." The work stretched through the day. In the storage sheds, they uncovered crates filled with clothing and torn photographs. Soil from the hog pens tested positive for blood. By afternoon, the truth was undeniable. 16 women Lawson already knew by name, and likely more, their stories buried under Benton's fences. He stepped outside for air, though the stench clung to everything. Julia stood near the fence, eyes red but dry. "It's worse than I thought," she whispered. Lawson nodded. "It always island," she swallowed. "I heard him once, on the phone. He said I wouldn't last much longer. He meant me." "Huh?" Lawson looked at her, this young woman who had walked through hell to bring out the truth. "You stopped him," he said quietly. "You gave us what we needed. You saved yourself and the others who might have been next." Julia's hands gripped the fence until her knuckles whitened. "Then why doesn't it feel like enough?" Lawson had no answer. He turned back toward the barns, where officers carried evidence bags under the glare of floodlights. He knew the truth. It never felt like enough. No verdict could restore what had been lost. At best, it could shine a light on the darkness and keep others from falling into it. By evening, the property was sealed off with yellow tape. Deputies guarded the gates. Reporters gathered at the highway, cameras pointed toward the farm, ready to send the story across the state. But Lawson thought not of headlines. He thought of Martha Green waiting in her small home, of 16 families who had prayed for answers and would soon receive truths too heavy to bear. Before leaving, he walked once more into the barn. The chest remained under the lights, its contents tagged and numbered. What struck him most was not only Benton's brutality, but the silence that had allowed it. Neighbors who looked away, deputies who signed reports with assumed relocation, every shrug, every hesitation, had built the graveyard now spread before them. Stepping back into the cool evening air, Lawson felt the weight settle on his chest. The farm no longer belonged to Hal Benton, but its ghosts would never leave. And, as the first stars pierced the twilight, he knew the truth would haunt Duplin County for years. The county jail in Kenansville was a squat concrete block, plain and gray against the sky. Its walls had heard countless confessions, but Lawson knew this day was different. This was Hal Benton, the man whose quiet farm had hidden a graveyard. Down the corridor, behind a pane of glass, Hal sat at a steel table, hands cuffed, posture unsettlingly relaxed. He looked less like a man under arrest than a farmer waiting out bad weather. His pale eyes fixed on Lawson as if expecting him. Lawson entered, dropping a folder thick with photographs onto the table. He sat across from Hal, neither speaking at first. Finally Lawson said, "We've been through your farm. We've found the chest, the belongings, the drains. You can stop pretending." Hal leaned back, the cuffs clinking softly. A faint smile crept onto his face. "Pretending?" Folks saw what they wanted to see. I gave them what they needed, meat for their tables, donations for their church. They were happy to look away. 16 women, Benton. Lawson shot back. 16 that we know of. Their lives weren't yours to take. Hal tilted his head, then gave a low laugh. Lives? You call that living? Drifting, begging, forgotten by everyone. Nobody cared where they went. Nobody but me. I gave them shelter. And when they proved ungrateful, when they tried to leave, I made sure they still served a purpose. The words hung heavy. Lawson kept his voice steady. You ended them. There's no purpose in that. Hal's eyes gleamed. Purpose is what you decide. They were weak. They came broken. I gave order. I fed my hogs. I fed the land. Nothing wasted. Lawson slid a photograph across the table, the silver locket, tagged and numbered. This belonged to a daughter, a sister. She wasn't yours to destroy. Hal's gaze flickered, but only briefly. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. They were all the same. Sad stories, tears, promises. And when they thought they could walk away, leave me like I was nothing, that's when they showed the truth. Liars, users, just like my wife. Lawson caught the opening. Your wife left you? And you punished every woman after her? Hal's mouth twisted into something between a smile and a snarl. She made me a fool. Took what was mine. Do you know what it's like to trust, then watch it thrown away? I swore no one would do that to me again, so I kept control. Always control. He spoke coldly, as if describing farm chores. Lawson studied him, the man who spoke of murder as routine. Behind every phrase Lawson heard, the echo of the chest, the drains, the silence of the barns. You'll face a jury, Lawson said. They'll see the proof. You'll answer for every name in that chest. Hal leaned back, faint smile returning. Juries are soft. They want bedtime stories. They won't understand what I gave those women, what I gave this county. Lawson gathered the photographs and stood. They don't need to understand. They only need to see, and they will. Oi. As he turned to the door, Hal's voice followed, calm and taunting. You think you finished me, but you'll never scrape me out of this place. I fed this land. It remembers me. It always will. The guard opened the door. Lawson stepped into the corridor, the words clinging like smoke. He stared at the folder in his hands. 16 women and one man who had cast himself as their judge and executioner. Justice would come, but nothing could cleanse what Hal Benton had left behind. The courthouse in Duplin County filled before dawn. By 7, the steps were crowded, families clutching photographs, neighbors whispering, reporters setting up cameras. The trial of Hal Benton had drawn them all. Mothers who had prayed for years, fathers who had buried hope, townsfolk who could not reconcile the man they had passed at the feed store with the horrors found on his farm. Inside, the courtroom was heavy with silence. Wooden benches creaked as people settled. The judge entered, black robe sweeping the floor, and the bailiff called the room to order. Then the side door opened, and Hal Benton was led in, cuffs on his wrists, deputies at his side. He looked much the same as the day of his arrest, thin, gray, unnervingly calm. As he sat at the defense table, his eyes swept the room. He did not linger on the judge or the lawyers, but on the families in the gallery. Some lowered their heads, others stared back with fury. Hal's mouth twitched almost into a smile. The prosecutor began with a simple truth. 16 women missing, 16 sets of belongings on Benton's farm, bone fragments recovered from his drains and soil. One by one, she laid out photographs, forensic reports, testimonies. Each piece passed to the jury, and with each, the weight in the room grew heavier. Lawson sat behind the prosecution's table, hands folded, watching not only the jury but the families. Martha Green was there, her daughter's silver locket in her palm. When its photograph appeared on the screen, she pressed the real locket to her chest and wept. Other families held one another, grief spilling in quiet sobs. When Hal rose to speak, the atmosphere shifted. Shoulders straight, voice even, he addressed the jury without shame. "You see monsters where there are none. I took in women with nothing. I gave them food, work, a place. And when they betrayed me, I returned them to the land, nothing wasted, circle of life." Gasps rippled through the gallery. A woman shouted, "You took my sister," before deputies calmed her. Hal's lawyer tugged his sleeve, urging silence, but he continued, his tone rising. "You all used me. You ate what I raised, you took my money, and you turned your eyes away. Now you want to call me devil? Number, I'm the truth you don't want to face." The judge struck his gavel, but the damage was done. The jury had seen no remorse, only pride. The families had heard no apology, only contempt. Lawson felt his gut tighten. Even here, in chains, Hal Benton believed himself untouchable. Over the following days, the prosecution built its case. Julia testified, her voice steady as she described nights in the bunkhouse, the chest she had opened, the moment Hal nearly caught her in the barn. Her words gave the jury more than evidence, they gave the families a glimpse of what their daughters had endured. The defense tried to argue no witness had seen Benton commit the killings, that the evidence was circumstantial. But the pattern was too exact, the items too damning, the science too precise. 16 women did not vanish by chance. 16 sets of belongings did not bury themselves. In closing, the prosecutor's voice carried through the silent room. These women were daughters, mothers, sisters. They were not livestock, they were not property, they were human beings, and their lives were stolen. You have the power to return dignity to their names. The jury deliberated less than 4 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood and delivered the verdict. Guilty on all counts. The judge's gavel fell, and Hal Benton was sentenced to death. A ripple moved through the room, gasps, sobs, and finally, applause from the back rows. It was not joy, but release, a way to honor the lives that could no longer speak for themselves. Hal did not flinch. He sat with that same faint smile, as if the verdict were meaningless. To him, perhaps it was, but to the families who had carried silence for years, it meant everything. Martha Green wept openly, clutching her daughter's locket and whispering words no one else could hear. As the courtroom emptied, Lawson remained in his seat, staring at the wood grain of the table. Justice had been spoken, yet the weight in his chest did not lift. Outside, cameras flashed and reporters shouted, but inside, Lawson thought only of the women whose names had been read aloud, and of the silence that had buried them for so long. Justice had come, but at a price no one should ever have had to pay. When the trial ended and the crowds dispersed, Duplin County seemed quieter than Lawson had known in years. Yet the silence was not peace. It was the hush that follows a storm. Benton's farm sat fenced and locked, its barns empty, its soil marked for excavation. No one passed without glancing once, then pressing harder on the gas. Back at his office, the case lingered like a shadow. The folder of photographs stayed on his desk. 16 names, 16 families. The verdict had delivered answers, but not the return of what was lost. Lawson saw it in the family's eyes at the courthouse, relief bound tightly with grief. One evening he visited Martha Green. Her home was small, her hands rough from years of labor, but her eyes carried a fragile light. On the table lay her daughter's locket beside a burning candle. "I can rest now," she whispered. "I know where she island. She didn't just disappear." Her voice trembled, but strength laced every word. Lawson left with the sense that healing, though slow, had begun. Other families reached out in letters. Some thanked him. Others simply wrote their daughters' names in careful script, as if to remind the world they had lived. Lawson tucked each letter into the folder, ensuring those names would never be forgotten. Julia left Duplin County not long after. She carried scars that would not fade, but also courage. "We can't erase what happened," she told Lawson in their last meeting, "but if we tell it, maybe it won't happen again." He watched her drive away, proud she had survived to speak those words. As autumn painted the back roads in gold and crimson, Lawson often walked the courthouse steps at dusk, his boots echoing in the stillness. Benton had once said the land would always remember him. Perhaps it would. But Lawson believed the land would also remember the women their families love, Julia's courage, and the community that finally chose to face the truth. One evening, standing at the fence line of the deserted farm, Lawson rested his hand on the weathered wood. The barns loomed silent, the fields bare. "You don't own this place anymore," he said quietly. "Their names live here now." For him, that was the truest form of justice, not punishment, but remembrance. The women would not be erased. Their lives, though stolen, would echo longer than the silence that once hid them.